I'm Owen Doyle. I live in Greencastle. I came to the Fishery College in 1976 to train as a fisherman. After 20 years or more in the industry, I left the industry in a kind of a way, and I now work in BIM. I'm a regional officer, or I should say I have been a regional officer for the County of Donegal for the last 20 years, but in actual fact, in a reorganisation of BIM, I'm moving to a new post in the new year. Well, I suppose I kind of fell into fishing. I come from Dublin originally. I fell into fishing by chance rather than anything else. My mother and father used to have a caravan and go on holidays all over the place. So I ended up in Duncannon in County Wexford, and I started to fish with a fella down there. I had done my leaving cert, and there weren't a lot of future in mid-70s when you had a leaving cert and you weren't going to college. So I kind of started into fishing then, and I fished in Dunmore East at Herring in 1975, and I decided that if I was going to be in the industry, I needed to get an education in the industry. So I came to Greencastle to the Fishery College to be professionally trained, I suppose you would say at the time. Well, a lot of people emigrated. A lot of people who may have had the points, they call it nowadays, went to college. I came to the Fishery College, and the course we were on, there was 40. So Greencastle was full of people who were trying to get into an industry that was, and still is to a certain degree, vibrant, and there was good money to be made. I could see in Dunmore, the first year I was there was a lot of herring, there was a lot of good boats, and that's where I wanted to go. So that's how I kind of started out. Getting into the industry, and indeed when I came out of the Fishery College I went to Killybegs and started to fish there. So I loved herring fishing. I just loved pelagic fishing, two-boat pair trawling. It was a Greencastle boat and a Killybegs boat paired together. I was on the Killybegs boat, and in 1977-78 I made a lot of money. I was a wealthy young man. Nobody that was at college of my friends or anybody that had emigrated was doing as well as I was. I was 20. Yeah. So it was good. It was a good life, good lifestyle. Good fishing. At that time, I suppose herring was worth a lot of money. I think in 1980 the price of herring collapsed. They were actually 26 Irish punts per box. The last time I remember being on a boat that was selling them. Today, all these years later, they're about £4 or £5 a box, maybe up to a tenner if you're lucky, and that's euros. So that'll give you an idea. I told the story whenever I was leaving or selling my own fishing boat. I was telling the crew that in 1 week's salary, I had bought a 2-year-old car with 27,000 miles on the clock for half my week's wages. So that's the way it was. I always say a lot of people in the industry, when we were fishing, we were protected from any downturns in the economy. It was a good life, good life. I got my own boat in, let me think, 1981. I decided I was fishing on a big pelagic trawler in Killybegs at that time. It was a Greencastle owned boat, and I just had the idea that I might try and move myself ahead, and I bought a boat and started to whitefish. I wasn't very experienced. I had to learn the hard way. I had a boat. Interest rates on that boat were as high as 16% in a bank loan. There were very little supports. You had to make it pay. It was very difficult. So I had that boat for about 3 years and then sold it to a friend of mine in Killybegs. There were a number of boats that BIM had at the time that weren't being paid for, and herring had taken a bit of a turn, as I'd already mentioned. So those boats came on the market, being financed by BIM. So I was lucky enough to get one of those boats, which I had for another 15 years. So I was white fishing, and then indeed I did a bit of pelagic fishing with that boat as well, along with the Marie Angelique, which was owned by Andrew Ward. So I was ended up back in the Celtic Sea many years later, doing what I liked best. Well, there is herring. There's herring about. There is a difficulty in herring at the moment. There's no question about it. The scientific evidence would be that the stock is poor, but there are herring about, and there's enough room for some inshore boats to make £1. It's not the volumes that were, and unfortunately the market for herring is not what it was. Roll mop herrings in Europe were a big thing, and all kinds of smoked herring and kippers. It was a big industry right across the British Isles. That's all faded, unfortunately, but there's still herring about, and hopefully the rebuilding plan will allow that stock come back, that there will be a fishery there into not so distant future for everybody wants to be involved. I'm not really a scientist, but the scientists always talk about reaching, you have to bear with me now, a maximum sustainable yield. So you can build a stock back up to what is supposedly a maximum sustainable yield, where you can harvest up until a certain level. And what's happened is that we've actually depleted a lot of the stocks below that level, but there is work going on between the industry on one hand, the Marine Institute and the government, the department, to try and get back to that place where the maximum sustainable yield is maintained and there's a harvestable stock on all stocks. In actual fact, the common fishery policy tries to get there in a European-wide setup. I don't know what's going to happen with Brexit, but that was an original plan. I suppose if I could give you an example of a real success, we had a hake problem back a number of years ago, and they talked about the Irish box and the hake recovery plan. There's not a restaurant in Ireland, you wouldn't have got a hake 15 years ago. Hake is everywhere. There's not a restaurant in Ireland that's not on the menu. So that'll give you an idea how a plan that has been devised to reach a maximum sustainable yield or a minimum sustainable yield with a harvest plan actually can work. Well, I suppose the industry has changed for a number of reasons. Like, as I say, 20 years ago I left the industry. It was after a time when the Carrigatine had sunk. We'd had a huge tragedy in Inishowen for everybody in Inishowen. And out of that, there was some things identified as, did we have the right training? Did we have the right boats? The boats were old, maybe not to the standard that they could have been. So there was a new boat building program, and a number of people were successful in getting new boats. I had applied myself. I'd sold my boat on the basis that I needed to get rid of what I had to be able to afford to get a new boat. And in the end I decided against it because of my age. I was turned 40, and I said 15, 20 years of the struggle that I'd been through for the last 20 years. The other aggravating thing at the time was oil prices were going through the roof. Quotas were becoming restrictive because of the fishery plans. I suppose I always equate a quota to a glass ceiling which cannot go above, but all the parameters underneath that, oil can go up, all costs, but the glass ceiling is only coming down. So I thought it could be difficult, and indeed it was difficult for people who got new boats, but I think things have, first of all, oil is not as expensive as it was, and there's more scope. The boats are better boats, they can travel. We would not have travelled from Inishowen to the south coast to Whitefish, but now the boats do that on a regular basis. So they use quota from different areas or different zones, and the fishing is reasonable for the people that are in it at the moment, I think. Well, in the early days of the BIM scheme, BIM was a banker in itself, but that faded out over time. So you might have had a BIM loan, and then you had a bank loan, because a lot of the boats were in some degree of disrepair, they needed work done. I know myself, after 10 years of the boat, I did a big refurb job on the boat I had. It was called the Sleeve Bloom, and I'll never forget the day when the final bill was tallied up when I come out of the boatyard in Killybegs. My new loan was $250,000. Now it seems like small beans these days to fishermen these days with bigger boats, but at that time it was a horrendous amount of money in my estimation. But the one thing I would say is I never had a spanner in my hand, or I never had a down day for the following 10 years, and that was worth the money, because all I had to do was actually fish. A lot of fishermen were always trying to fix things and keep things going. So I got rid of that whole problem. So up until the time I sold out, I really had the pleasure of fishing without an awful lot of downtime. It's a chance you take at the time, and no matter how much, like there's things that you do like projections of what you're going to catch, which by the new quota management at the end of the year means absolutely nothing, but the bank bill is still the same. So you have that to contend with, and it's not a job where you can say, well, over the next 10 years I'm going to do X, Y and Z, or I'm going to increase my catch by... Really the only thing ever I saw increasing was your time at sea. So there was more cost, more time to catch the same, well, the glass ceiling amount of fish. So it is a difficult job, and I suppose fishing communities have changed because that it has been so difficult, and people have had to go other ways, and some people stuck with it. And the sector sort of changed. You know, there's more inshore fishing, there's more diversification within. Trawling was a big thing in Greencastle when I came, or when I got married there first, you know, in around 1980. There was like 35 trawlers in Greencastle. There's about 8 or 10, but what the 8 or 10 boats make now would be vast amount, multiples of what the whole port was making all them years ago. You know, it's a modern advanced fleet. Well, I think Inishowen, you know, we sometimes say fishing is bad and fishing is this, that and the other. At the moment, like crab prices in Inishowen, which is another big fishery, one of the biggest fisheries we have in the country, and Inishowen is a big part of that, are very high. There had been an increase in catch year on year up until the middle of 2017. We've had a bit of a blip, maybe, but now that's starting to come back. At the end of 2018, stocks, the amount of crab available, of good quality crab with meat in them, is high, along with a price now of €4.50 a kilo or €4 plus. This is talking about a flat price of $2.20 for the last 10 years. So of course people are making money. We have things like whelk that were never exploited. It's a little bit of a boom and bust fishery, but we've had years and years of a good whelk fishery in Inishowen here. That's all stuff that's going abroad. The market has changed, even the crab market. Crab have been going to China from Inishowen, which you sort of say, China? Couldn't be. Now we have processed crab going to China. So there's jobs ashore, there's jobs at sea. It's an evolving, changing situation. And likewise, a lot of people that would have been fishing at the time moved into aquaculture. So, you know, your brethren in the bay next door that's growing oysters or harvesting mussels, he originally was a fisherman at some stage. It's just a different type of indigenous job, in my estimation, as the way I look at it. It's an evolving type of lifestyle. You know, you're not tied into any one thing. You know, you have a boat or you're at sea and you want to make money. Like there was a fishery for king scallop and indeed queen scallop off the north coast of Inishowen that people exploited. They used to come from the Isle of Man to fish it, and a lot of the people from Inishowen actually got into that fishery at the time. So it's an ever evolving situation, in my estimation. Of course, there's problems. There's fisheries like salmon, for example, that have had to close down due to all kinds of impacts, not necessarily just drift net impacts, but to preserve any type of salmon at all, the powers that be decided it had to close down. So that's a big loss, and I suppose that was a good fishery for a lot of people, but that's the reality of what happened. Well, I for many years in my role in BIM was on what was called the tagging committee before the fisheries closed altogether. In actual fact, in Donegal, there are still a couple of fisheries open, commercial draft net fisheries, and there's tags. There's an allocation of salmon on those rivers, which is divided 50-50 between the angling fraternity and the commercial fraternity, or commercial fishermen, I should say. But like, even at that, every year there's less and less tags. And now you'll hear the anglers saying there's seals up the river where I'm angling. The cormorants are a problem. We need a cormorant cull. We need a seal cull. And this is what fishermen had been saying many, many years beforehand. We have a lot of people who don't want to see that. There's an environmental lobby to protect all animals, but I think in essence some things have gone out of balance. We have issues with regards to wild salmon with water runoff, whether our water is clean, what we do in an agricultural situation, are our rivers fit for purpose, the catchment area able to produce enough smolts, and then of course the big problem is what happens to those smolts at sea. More and more so we're seeing evidence that those smolts that go to sea are not, the survival rates are low. So all the impacts, be it angling, be it drift netting, the reality is that maybe climate change, other issues are causing the problem. None of these things are single fixed solutions. Get rid of the drift net man. It's not necessarily a solution. The big problem I've seen in my time in BIM is the impact when you take away those fisheries from coastal communities, because a lot of coastal communities don't have anything else. And I think in Inishowen we're somewhat maybe luckier than in the west of the county, because we're close to urban centres like Derry City or even Belfast, Letterkenny. We're kind of not as bad as if you live somewhere in the west of the county, or you live on an island off the coast of the county, where there's no train to pick you up in the morning to go to work, or there's no factory anywhere close by. So there's been a lot of difficulty with that transition. And to be honest, I think some of the things like the common fishery policy, there needs to be a complete revision of the ideas that, there need to be exemptions for inshore coastal communities, islanders and mainlanders, whichever way you want, because the impact that, if you take a cod recovery plan, which has affected Donegal for going on 15 years, I would say, it impacted every small boatman, that he couldn't drift net, he couldn't tangle net. But what he would do, the impact that they would have is so minute that it wouldn't matter anyhow. Do you understand? So the devastation to coastal communities has been a huge negative impact. And there are programs, I've been involved in the FLAG program. In actual fact, this filming here is funded under this program. So, but it's only a touch on the tip of the iceberg to try and get some type of diversification running where communities have been devastated by the loss of their fishery. However, you have to ask the question, well, could we not revise this in some way? Now, this is my personal opinion. Obviously, I work for a state agency, and it's an agency of the department. So we're doing a social history here, so I'm giving you a social history opinion answer. I think that the common fishery policy needs to be looked at. The inshore sector needs to have a complete relook at an allowance for them so that these communities can be vibrant with their own fish, and they can do all the things on the Wild Atlantic Way, like, you can catch a fish that has been caught cod today, and so on and so forth, that puts some small amount of money back into local economies. So there have been a lot of projects in a lot of different areas. I don't want to be specific about ones, but to give you a range, we've had ones from educational type projects, supports for marine activity like sailing, canoeing, that sort of thing. We have a small processing plant in the west of the county that was a new startup, was supported. And we have social history type things, maritime museums. So there's a range of things whereby we will support it. What I see about FLAG is that it's a very open, put it this way, it would be very hard to find a project that wouldn't fit in somewhere. And when the will's there and it's a community-led type thing, it normally passes. There's a board obviously scrutinise these projects, but the board is made up of people who live in these communities, so it'll be rare that they wouldn't, and there has been some I'm not saying some better than others. All the projects that have progressed to drawing down the money have all been good projects. I've been lucky enough for the last 20 years that I've had the freedom to be the regional officer for BIM. I've done all sorts of things. I'm heavily involved in licensing of boats, safety grants, flag. I was also the secretariat to a thing called RIF, Regional Inshore Fishery Forum, which essentially is looking at legislative things and fishery management ideas that can advise the minister or the department on how they might change things for the betterment of the inshore sector. So the job has been diverse. And a lovely job to do, and I spend very little time in the office, or have spent as little as possible, because I want to be part of and in the community that I work for. So from that point of view, BIM has been very good to me. I know Rome can't be built in a day, but I think there is progress being made. I suppose the inshore sector itself was probably the least represented sector within the fishing industry. There are good organisations that represent the trawler men and the pelagic men and so on and so forth, but the vast majority of small boat men were fairly disorganised, and I suppose over the last number of years the NIF and the RIF have been designed to make that into some kind of a structure so that they have a voice for themselves. So, like, I'm sort of 60-odd-year-old now, and when I look back at the career I've had, both at sea and ashore, I'm quite happy with the way it's all worked out. All right.